Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me to talk NRL news and the Parramatta Eels, my good mates Sixties and Clint. It's been a bit of a wild ride for the Eels, and it's coming to an end. The flame hasn't quite gutted out yet, boys. It's still alight, but it's flickering and struggling. But we're still here. But how are you guys doing this week?
Well, mate, right now I'm freezing. We were talking about that before, and I'm not sure whether I'm freezing because those flames have flickered out or because that ill wind of Parramatta's 2023 season is blowing too strongly right now. But, yeah, it's not the best time to be a Parramatta Eels supporter right now, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Clint, how are you doing?
Yeah, look, it's a bit melancholic, isn't it, lads? You know, it kind of feels like the it's like the car crash that you know that's going to happen, and you're just waiting for that collision to finally take place, so then you can assess the fallout from it. Hasn't been a great week in blue and gold land.
And yet, for all the doom and gloom, understandably, there is some spots of hope and good news, which we'll get to shortly. But in order to do that, we've got to ring the bell.
News team, assemble!
Well, fellas, before I was talking about the cold winds, the loss of the flickering flame, well, thankfully something that is keeping us warm is our wonderful sponsors, Big Swing Golf at Northmead and Star Partners Real Estate Auburn, NRL and Parramatta. They stick by us. They keep the flames burning on the Cumberland Throws. So thank you to our wonderful sponsors there. And also a reminder that the home of the Eels, Parramatta Leagues Club, is where we will be after this weekend's big match against the Roosters. So come and see us. We're in Jack's Bar and Grill about half an hour after full time, where we will be hopefully dissecting an Eels win that keeps them still mathematically a chance of making finals football. But moving on, unfortunately, we do have to start tonight. We're talking about more injury news, and it's significant for both the NRL and the NRLW, because for the NRL, it's Mitch Moses, and for the NRLW, it's Elsie Albert. John, it's been a horrible year.
You can only just laugh at this point, like laugh from borderline insanity, because we've spoken about the other factors that were within our control, but where we've gone wrong this year. In particular, with your extended series of columns, 60s, looking at where the Eels have sort of misstepped. But talking about things you cannot control, injuries have been brutal. And yeah, Mitchell Moses cracking that eye socket, needing surgery, I believe. It really is the cherry on top of a rather awful cake. And, you know, outside of that, your heart goes out for Elsie Albert, who, battled through that calf injury to get back onto the field in round 4, had a dominant 25 minutes where you actually saw the makings of something pretty cool for the Eels in the middle. You could sort of envision her, Kendi Charrington, the young Tyler Amiatu, you got Mahalia Murphy out there, all building off the platform that Elsie was laying in the future. And unfortunately, she went down, and it was bad. You could just tell from her reaction, she was absolutely gutted in the in goals, couldn't move, needed to be helped off by a couple of the trainers, and really struggled in that regard. And we're still waiting on the official confirmation of the degree of the injury, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is a full-blown calf tear. Like I don't know if it's grade 3 or grade 4 at the highest level, but her reaction was not good.
No, it wasn't, and that will say plenty about what has beset the Eels this year if the major, or one of the two marquee recruits for the NRLW ends up playing one game for the season. I mean, at best, Rachel Pearson's going to play 6 games.
Yes, exactly. Best case scenario. I mean, technically, best case scenario, if the Eels conjured a miracle and got to the finals, you'd tack on a couple more. But regular season, she's only playing those 6 games. And yeah, it is really gut-wrenching because obviously on a personal level, Elsie just suffered a horrible injury. Calf injuries are absolute buggers. But on a team level, you got the first glimpse of what could have been for our NRLW, and Elsie really, had that forward pack firing in a game where they had barely any possession in the first half. They sort of counterpunched Brisbane and it socked them. Like they were reeling on the back foot. That game was there for them to really take a huge step forwards. And while they did a great job to battle through the loss of Elsie, when she went off, I feel like a lot of our, not just momentum, but our hope in that game sort of evaporated. And while they did a fantastic job to fight on, we got 25 minutes of what could have been, because Elsie looked every bit the marquee signing in how she took that big Broncos pack to task.
Yeah, and she was doing it without Kennedy Cherrington.
Yeah, yes.
So
we're going to have exactly 0 games of our best 3 players on the field this year. Like that.
Yeah.
That's just the grim reality. We got no games with the triumvirate of players that we deliberately built around this year. And despite their issues in the first 2 games, where I thought they played really ordinary football, I said that they were building against Newcastle Sixties, and I feel somewhat validated in what we saw against Brisbane. And if you had those 3 pieces from day one, as much as there are still probably issues with the NRLW team in terms of the extended roster construction and players we could have kept or recruited to make it that much better, you can sort of see what they were going for. Like you can really build a team around those 3 players, but not when they're not available and not when they play 0 games together. So yeah, heart goes out to Elsie and to the NRLW team, who have been just gutted by injuries this year.
Oh, Clint, you live not far from Kellyville. Can you give us any insights? Has there been a huge mirror that's been smashed up at Kellyville this year? Is there? I haven't seen any big ladders overhanging the playing fields at Kellyville, but it makes me think someone's broken a mirror. Someone's been walking under a ladder. Someone's had issues with a black
running
cat
around as well.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I can't speak to anything that I've seen firsthand, but it certainly feels as though we've been bewitched and cursed in this fashion, lads. Because obviously it's exactly the same with the men's, in that this year we're yet to field our strongest possible lineup based on the squad makeup. Obviously we came into this year with a lot of hope. On the back of a 2022 grand final appearance, and the team's been largely very competitive. Up until probably the last month or so, you'd say we've been in every game at up until the 80th minute, or thereabouts. I think our biggest loss prior to going down to the Warriors was a 10-point loss to Brisbane in Darwin.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I think it's important. I think it's important that we stipulate that we're trying to acknowledge all aspects of the season that have gone wrong, and and talking about the players that are missing, and just to refresh people's memory, my rough calculations for the number of matches missed by the top 30. A number of weeks ago, it had got up to 116 games, and that's conservative because I'm not fully aware of exactly any matches missed by top 30 players in New South Wales Cup level games. I've tried to cross-reference as much as possible, but I've perhaps missed some there. And of those games, there's something like 88 of them have been due to injury. Well, that'd be now up to about 120 because we've got Andrew Davey and Mitch Moses out this week. So yeah, it's jumped up to 120 plus for the season. 90 plus for the season due to injury. So that is really significant when we're putting it on top of a short roster. and a roster that's missing players in key positions. So, sorry for interrupting there, Clint, but
no, not at all.
because those
important to
factors go
press.
together. Those factors go together, don't they? Because you've got the injuries and suspensions, which, suspensions, debatable that it's out of our hands or not, but injury is mostly out of our hands. But having a depth chart that's not what it should be is in our control. And when you get the perfect storm of injuries and suspension, well, you know what? That's how it is. I mean, look, I guess if we hadn't had the sort of season that we've had in terms of injury and suspension, we probably do make finals football this year. But you know what? You have to expect you're going to cop a bit of bad luck every year with in relation to players not being available. So not, let's say, not excuses, reasons for the season.
Look, there's plenty of contributing factors, and just to preface to everybody listening as well, we all acknowledge that there's, as Sixty said, factors beyond our control, factors where we only have influence, and factors where we have direct control. And they all have played a contributing part to where we are at the moment. So at this particular point in time, we're talking about the things outside of our control, with the injuries, and you're being dishonest if you're not acknowledging the effect that that's had, and that's what we're doing now.
Yeah. Now, Clint, I want to throw something to you straight away. Then, after the weekend, and we saw a horrific loss by the NRL team, that sort of scoreline against the Broncos, horrendous. We saw the NRLW put up a real genuine fight, as we spoke about, against a star-studded Broncos NRLW team. But the question to you now is, are we now honest with ourselves and put a line through both teams when it comes to finals football for this year?
The short answer is yes. As painful as it is to say, and look, the fact of the matter is, us here and those listening, we're all still going to go out to the stadium on Friday night, hopeful and wanting for the best. But when you try and on the balance of probabilities and rationalize it, you'd have to say yes, it does look as though that's something. And look, if I'm perfectly honest with you, gents, I had the sinking feeling hit me during the Titans game when both Mike Acevo and RCG was in bin. I went, oh boy, we're not ever going to field our strongest possible side this year. And with the games that we had coming up, I saw that as very problematic. And when those suspensions came down, that's when my apprehension probably turned to certainly a strong sense of fear, where I shifted more towards hopeful than confident about our chances this year. And it's just kind of compounded over the last few weeks in some pretty average performances, or certainly some very average results.
Yeah, and people look at how we went against the Broncos in round 24 last year, when we beat them 53-6. Now, I'll just run through
There's a lot of mirroring between those two games from the reverse, because like for us, where we had RCG out, the Broncos had Patrick Carrigan out that game. They lost Adam Reynolds in the middle of the game, as we did Mitchell Moses in the middle of the game. We were coming into some hot form and fighting for top four. These guys this year are looking to close out top two and potentially the minor premiership. There's a lot of mirroring between those two games.
Yep. But also, have a listen to the teams. So last year, Gutho at fullback, yes, he was still in the game. Sevo on the wing, nope, not there. Okay, Will Penisini, yes. Tom Opachik, nope. Wyatt Blake, no. Both halves were there, but we lost Mitch Moses at half time. RCG, nope. Reed Arnie, nope. Junior there, yes. Sean Lane, no. Isaiah Papali'i, no. Murata Nukore, no. Matto there. Did Makahesi play on last week, or was he?
But he was a concussion
he got
sub.
activated.
Yeah, that's right. And then Jake Arthur, no. Oregon Kafusi, no. So quite a difference there. Then you look at the Broncos. Tamari Martin was their fullback. Now they got Reece Walsh.
Hmm.
All right.
That was a side grader for you guys.
Branko Lee was at centre. And who they have last week in the centre position? Herbie Farnworth.
A couple of chumps by Staggs and Farnworth,
yeah. Jordan Pereira was the other winger. And they had it was the young bloke.
Mariner.
Dean Mariner.
That's right. Yeah, Mariner was in. Okay. Their halves were the same. Their dummy half, their props last year were halves and Flegler. Turpin was the dummy half. And they had who was it? Jordan Ricky and Kurt Capewell in the back row. Corey Jensen played lock in that game. Billy Walters came off the bench. Kobe Hetherington was on the bench. Keenan Paliasia was on the bench, as was Zach Hosking. So it's interesting. You'd have to say they certainly had their side strengthened significantly from last year. Even if it was just one player of Reece Walsh coming in, that is a major difference.
Massive.
And all those role players, Walters and Palacios and Hetheringtons, have all stepped up and played, either above their capabilities or expanded their game to new heights. And that's what teams do when they're confident and they're sort of feeding off each other and off the energy that victories and successive victories bring. So Broncos have done a good job. They took their lumps and developed their young guys, and now they're in a premiership window. And they, as much as it stings to say, unlike the Eels who couldn't go out and find that missing piece signing, they found Reece Walsh, and that's probably the difference when we're going to look back on the Eels from 2019 to 2023 and the Broncos from their building process going back a couple of years into the window they now have. Should they find premiership success, Reece Walsh will be the difference between those two teams.
Yeah. Well, just talking about then with the roster, obviously we've had a pretty big couple of weeks with the series of posts on what's happened with the Eels roster this year, the impact of it from injury and suspension, and then we've got the latest one with what the roster looks like for next year. Fellas, it's been quite a fallout from that. The replies have just absolutely smashed the website. We're, up around that 150 mark with a couple of the posts there. The first post, series 1, part 1, is well up there in terms of the most widely read post in the history of TCT. The third post on next year is, I think when I last looked, it was getting pretty close to about 4,000 reads on that one. So it's starting to gather quite a bit of momentum. But, I have to mention it again. We got 27 players locked in for next season. That's a fair whack of having the roster sorted, and that might normally be a good thing. Like, bang, we got all these players locked in. But then when you look at the detail and that you've got that consists of 6 outside backs and 6 spine players, and that's it. And that the outside backs include Zach Seeney. Well, it is Zach Seeney, Hayes Dunster, Will Penisini, Sean Russell, Bailey Simonson, Mike Acevo. That's the choice at this stage for Brad Arthur for his centres and wingers. And you go, well, he's shown no inclination to use Zach Seeney, who has, he hasn't set the world on fire in New South Wales Cup. Hayes has had injury upon injury in the last 2 years. And, a more dedicated bloke you wouldn't find. And he's battled and battled and battled. But we don't know what next year holds in store for him. If he has the same availability next year, then the Eels are stuck with 4 players that they have to hope are available every week. Because that's the nuts and bolts of it there. And then when you look at the spine, you've got 6 players to cover the 4 spine positions. And that's 4 spine positions across 2 grades, mind you. And same for the outside backs. I mean, they're basically saying we haven't got the outside backs or the spine players to cover the NRL and New South Wales Cup. What happens if Clint Gutherson goes down injured? Well, the spine players are Dejan Arce, Dylan Brown, Brendan Hands, Joey Lussick, Mitch Moses. Is there another fullback in that?
No.
And if you go, well, we'll move Sean Russell to fullback. Hello? What happens with the outside backs then? So we've got some major problems that are existing there, and I know I've covered it all in the post. But the thing is, are we seeing if the club's not going to go out and buy anyone, and we don't know what the club's going to do? This is, the off season is going to be very interesting for the Parramatta Eels before we get to pre-season, because they are going to need to get to work to fix this up. And if it can't be fixed, what's the option? Well, we were talking about it before, weren't we? That there's going to be an acceleration of the younger players in the club, and maybe we're starting to see the first sign of that, John, in the New South Wales Cup team list this week. Can we go out of order now in looking at the team list Tuesday?
It's
Can you take
the
us
most
through?
exciting part of team list Tuesday, isn't it?
Yep. So I'll throw to you now for the New South Wales Cup team list for Team List Tuesday.
Well, there's been a few flag-eligible boys that we've come to be used to seeing in this grade now. Obviously, Arthur and Sam, who went on to have an NRL debut this year and scored a try in that win against the Dragons. Scored the first try, actually, in a win against the Dragons. Josh Lynn's played a few games up there now. We know that Jontay-Junior Betham-Misa has been an absolute fixture in that grade. Charlie Guymer had his debut. So there's a few guys there that we've seen. But this week they've been joined by a trio of flag eligible but also SG ball eligible compatriots in the starting team. Will Penisini's younger brother and excellent football in his own right, Richard Penisini, gets a start in the centres. And he's joined there on the interchange bench by Matty Arthur, Buds playing the utility role with dummy half interchange player, and big Sam Tuivaiti getting a look in as well as the interchange prop. So a whole stack of young players in this team, and 3 players here, very keen to see how they go. And probably we've got very high raps in all 3 players, boys, for differing reasons. But of all 3, while Buds and Sam have very high ceilings, and I think that they're 100% NRL players, NRL plus players in the making, the fact that you mentioned at Sixties, that sort of crunch in the back line, that Richard's getting a start and how he holds up here is definitely the most curious short-term battle for me. But so they've got a whole stack of young players this week. Miller, Stephen, Penisini, Lynn, obviously Arthur, Guymer, Betham-Misa and Tuivaiti playing in the Cup squad. And it's a bit of a, let alone a flag takeover, an SG ball takeover of the New South Wales Cup at this point.
Yeah, and speaks to the talent that is in or was in that SG ball team, that you've got so many of these young players that have been brought through to open age football. Clint, what's your take? Is this going to be the best way for the Eels to go to, if there isn't anything on the horizon in the way of signings, that BA at some stage next year bites the bullet and bloods these young players, perhaps 12 months ahead of where he might have ideally wanted to blood them?
Well, look, I think regardless of any potential external signings, that this is still a good move, because you want those guys with that level of enthusiasm, chomping at the bit and applying this pressure. these are the guys who could replace the incumbent, you know. And I think a bit of fresh blood motivates absolutely everyone, and likewise that fresh blood learns and adapts from the professionals quickly in those environments. But yeah, I think it's the right call. Regardless, you know, I remember earlier this year, 40 and I sitting in the stands watching New South Wales Cup and deliberating when we should bite the bullet with some of these types of decisions. Interesting that it's happening now, and I dare say part of the reason it's happening now is because the New South Wales Cup side is playing against the Roosters, who are sitting at the bottom of the table. I think in New South Wales Cup, I think they're probably looking for a game or two like that to make some of these moves. But yeah, look, you know, it's a good decision. It's the right decision, and you know, they come out of a game like this, you know, hopefully with a win, a little bit of confidence. It's something to roll into the preseason with those boys, because for many of them as well, it'll probably be their first full-time NRL preseason. You know, obviously they get invited along and they do parts and aspects of the preseason leading up to this point, but you know, they'd become full-timers going into the upcoming preseason. So I'm excited, you know, and I'm like you originally touched on. I think Richard Penisini is definitely the one to watch most here. Obviously, Will has had an accelerated level of development in NRL over the last 2 years, 2 and a bit years. And the fact of the matter is, boys, you know, maybe it might be a year earlier than what BA might be wanting to blood these guys, but you don't know they're ready until you throw them out there and see how they go, you know. And the first step in doing that is putting them up against other men in New South Wales Cup, and we get to find out the answer to that question this Friday.
Yeah, and to me, it harkens back to 2018, where we started to see some of the young players like Dylan Brown and Ethan Parrott and Hayes. Well, those Reed had debuted earlier in 2018, but
he had that accelerated development from 17 to 18. I think it was probably you know, and then we had also had guys like Murata Niokore debut that year, who'd been in the system for a couple of years too. So, sorry, go on.
Yeah, but those younger players that I mentioned, they were brought up into the New South Wales Cup from NYC late in the season, and they got about 5 or 6 games towards the end of that season. Dylan Brown, of course, was one of the key players that. And I think Smoke and Joe was even got a bit of time in alongside Dylan as well up in reserve grade. He's now with the Roosters himself, isn't he?
We'll be playing him this week, yeah.
Yeah, he's playing against them this week.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so they got that time at the end of the season. Now, it did impact where the team finished in 2018. Was it NYC in 2018, or was it had it switched back to Jersey Flegg in 20?
Holden Cup and the NYC concluded at the end of 2017 with the grand final that we played against Manly.
Yeah.
Yes. So it had dropped back to being Jersey Flegg back in 2018. So they were elevated from Jersey Flegg to New South Wales Cup. The Parramatta's Jersey Flegg team, I think they dropped a few places, ended up having to play in an elimination finals match, and had to play without Dylan Brown because Dylan had badly fractured his finger in the last New South Wales. Yeah. Like that was the last New South Wales Cup game of the season, and it then put him out for the season. But it was like the introduction to a lot of Eels supporters of who these young players were, and of course they then went on to do the pre-season, and someone like Dylan ended up forcing his way into the starting team right from the start of the season. It forced the moving Corey Norman onto the Dragons, his elevate. So there's maybe an element of that here's a bad Eels season, and okay, there's a bit of a light on the horizon with the younger players. Now, my stance on this is these young players are the portent to better times. However, it does not in any way remove the need for the Eels to sign a game-breaking back. Ideally, you'd be looking at someone as a fullback, but they have to have a game changer. They need a game changer. If they want to win a premiership, what they've got there with these players, if they come through as we expect that they will, you will have a very, very good finals team again. But if they want the Eels to break the drought, the purse strings have to be opened. And if it's not just the straight out purse strings, they simply have to be, I'm not going to say creative. They have to be proactive. They have to aggressively chase a target that they identify as someone who will change how the Eels are able to win games. And there's no avoiding that. There's no avoiding that there needs to be a couple of key acquisitions to change the fortunes of the Eels. But anyway, we've spent quite a bit of time talking on that. John, what's the rest of the Team List Tuesday news? What's the main takes across all the grades?
So obviously the jersey flag, I wouldn't say they've been left reeling, but they've sort of been left to make do without all those players moving up to the New South Wales Cup. So just to reiterate, you're talking Arthur Stephen, Richard Penisini, Joshua Lynn, and then on the interchange bench, Matty Arthur, Charlie Guymer, and Jontay's been a part of the Cup for the entire season, so I wouldn't really count him there, but also Sam Tuivaiti. So they're without, pretty much half a starting team or thereabouts of talent, and they've had to make do with that. But they've still got a pretty good team on paper. Arthur Tweedle at fullback. Will Latu comes in the centres to replace Richard Penisini. Blaze Talangi's back, which is really nice in. That helps mitigate the loss of Joshua Lynn significantly, and Blaze is an outstanding player in his own right. Nick Linares takes over at dummy half, with Saxon Pryke coming into the starting team at lock forward, and that's the extent of the starting pack reshuffle. On the interchange bench, Jacob Davis is back to help with the dummy half duties. Noah Reid, Araz Namva, and Lance Fulema round out the rotation. And in the NRLW, they've got some changes this week brought about by the Elsie Albert injury. So
can I just before we get into the NRLW, fellas, quick take then on the Jersey Flegg, because they've got a very important game at Ringrose Park against the Roosters, who are top of the table in Jersey Flegg. They have to win it, the Eels. Depending on the minutes played by certain players, do you think it's likely we're going to see late changes with players doubling up?
Yeah.
For example, we don't know how many minutes someone like Matt Arthur might play.
I think
now,
that I think that Sam Tuivaiti is almost a sure thing to back up. I think they'll use him on restricted minutes, and Matty Arthur could be another one. Yeah.
Look, I think it's going to be tremendous to see these boys against open age players, and especially Matt Arthur is one out of the box as a dummy half. He's improving exponentially, coming through, jumping from the 19s to the 21s of the Flegg. He is a star dummy half of the highest order.
I want to see someone on the opposition team on the Roosters on Friday night give him a reason to fire up, because even though he's going to be giving away a few kilos, he won't back down at all.
People will see someone of a little bit of a different temperament to Jake in the
fire and ice, isn't it? Like Jake is just the calm, stoic, sort of organizer at halfback, and Matty is like your classic instigating dummy half, isn't he?
Oh, he's a niggler. He loves to get a little word in the ears of the opposition players, and he doesn't lose control.
No.
Like that.
He presses buttons.
But when it fires up, you'll see him at the front. Like he'll be at the front of the fellas there standing their ground.
Yeah, he's a bit of Mick Ennis there, isn't there? He knows how to press the buttons.
Yeah. He's a very entertaining player to watch. Not the least for what he creates, and he's a bit of a try-scoring freak this year as well. But it'll be interesting how many minutes he gets, because I think they need him. And Nick Lenars, he is a quality player. We're huge fans of Nick Lenars, but Nick's been going great guns out of the lock position. He's got that versatility to play the lock and dummy half role. But I reckon there's a near certainty that if Woods only does short minutes, that he'll back up in the Jersey flag. So, would you both be happy with that, to see some of those boys double up?
Yeah, absolutely.
If they're playing below 15 minutes, absolutely. I think in the past there's sort of been a unofficial threshold of about 20 minutes from other guys that have done the cup to flag double on the weekend. So sort of keep an eye out for any players approaching that threshold. But yeah, anywhere around that, I've got no issues with them backing up, especially given that the flag are pushing for a spot in the finals.
Yep. Okay. Sorry for interrupting. So the NRLW key changes there.
It all sort of circulates around the absence of Elsie Albert, which is a huge blow to the team. So we see a reshuffle in the forward pack with Madeline Jones starting in the front row alongside Talisha O'Neill. Kyra Simon takes over at lock forward. And then on the interchange, Nakia Davis-Walsh comes back into the team. And I think that's the extent of the changes there. Eels taking on the Canberra Raiders, who have been probably the pick of the expansion teams this year, boys. A couple of former Eels in that one there, headed by none other than the one that probably hurts the most to lose, former captain Smaima Taufa. She's been outstanding. She's probably a not runaway, but a very strong favourite to take out the overall Player of the Year honours in the NRLW right now. She is killing it there, but alongside that, Ashley Quinlan's been very good in the halves for Canberra. They've got Tamaya Kelly-Signs, and then at the extended roster, former Eels Pathways prospect for Tessa Leo. So a bit of a blue and gold favour there for the Canberra Raiders or the Valkyries. I'm not sure which one they're unofficially or officially badged. The Eels, they're going to do it tough this week, boys. They showed plenty of character last week, and if they can do the same, even if they don't get the win, I'll be plenty proud of them. And it's a chance to build, I suppose. That's the best way of putting it right now, is they've got a lot of young players in the back line, some good pieces in the forward pack that just need some more minutes to grow. Players like Amiatu, who looks like she might be something out of the box, 60s. Very good footwork before the line, great leg speed for a prop forward there. So if they can hold on to her and give her a chance to grow this year, could be one to watch.
Yeah, I should have paid attention to what her numbers came in at for post-contact meters, because the eye test said that she did a bit of damage in post-contact and on the weekend. The interesting thing, this is actually at round 5, the third home game for the Raiders. How many home games did the Eels get this year?
Eels get 4 home games officially, but only 2 real home games.
Yeah. So this is their third game at GIO Stadium, and the Eels got two games at Combank, and then that's it.
Yeah, well, you talk about those things that you can and can't control in a season, boys. And both the NRL and the NRLW teams for the Eels have copped it pretty firmly up the backside this year when it comes to stuff they can't control with the NRL and NRLW draws. They have been something. I could use a lot stronger language than that. They have been something. Unfortunately for our girls, they have copped an absolutely brutal draw. You get your 2 home games at NRLW level in the first 3 weeks of the season, and then you're on the road for the next 6. Good luck.
Yeah, well, the Raiders get 5 games at GIO Stadium. 5. And the Eels get a home game at GIO Stadium.
I know, and Cogra.
Go figure that. Yeah, home match at GIO and a home match at Cogra.
Yeah.
So,
like I said, if I speak, I'm in big trouble. If we say what we should be saying, honestly, no filters. There'd be people getting roasted pretty badly, because that I know that draws are complex matters, and there's a lot of things you got to juggle, stadium availability and all those different scheduling clashes and different matchups and whatnot. But the fact that you couldn't even get that right, really, and in a season where you've shown that you're confident enough to have standalone fixtures. So it's not like you have to play double, triple headers out of the same venue. The Eels found a way to cop it up the backside for both the men and women. So that's actually impressive.
Yeah. So that brings us to the NRL.
Mm-hmm. So, final team list to talk about this week. Obviously, the NRL taking on the Roosters this week out at CommBank Stadium. Another weird schedule too, boys. It's our last home game, and there's still just about a month left in the season. So, that's how things fall. But the Eels do have a couple of changes this week. And like the story of the season, just as we get reinforcements back, some big-time reinforcements, it feels like we lose someone of equal or greater value. We've seen it happen a few times this year where just as we think we're getting to potentially having our full-strength team on the field like Clint alluded to, it just never happens. And this week we get Reagan Campbell-Gillard and Mike Acevo back, which is awesome, but you're losing Mitchell Moses and obviously Andrew Davey too to a smaller extent. But, you're losing your signal caller, your field marshal, your general. So the Eels have Sevo back on that left wing, which pushes Bowie Simonson into the centres. So no more 30-metre run sideways into a cutout pass to the other side of the field that gets intercepted, Bowie. When a player has a license revoked in NRL, it's usually in terms of having their kicking license revoked because it's a non-spine player, sort of taking advantage of a breakdown and play to kick. I think Bowie might have his cutout pass license revoked after what happened last week. But yes, Bowie goes back into the centres where he's been a much better player. In the halves, you have Dejan Arce at 5'8" with Dylan Brown donning the fabled 7. He's going to be at halfback this week. It'll be interesting to see how he can handle those responsibilities. Reg is straight back into the front row. No surprises there. Probably the biggest surprise this week, boys, and it comes in the forwards, is on the left edge. That troublesome left edge position. Sean Lane hasn't been able to stay healthy, and we've started a rotation of players out there. Obviously, Davey, Madison. I've had a couple other guys sort of spotlight in there. This week is Jermaine Hopgood, so I want to hear your feelings about that one because Hoppy's been very good at lock forward, obviously. And I think it was against South Sydney where we had that bit of an injury crisis where he ended up sort of moonlighting out on the edge. And Brad Arthur actually shouted him out in the post-match presser about how good a job he did sort of holding down that spot. But he takes over on the left edge to start and presumably play the full 80 minutes here unless there's a reshuffle for Ryan Madison. And speaking of Maddo, he's on the bench with Moretti, Greg, and Hands. And I got to say, I know it's come at the cost of Mitchell Moses and Andrew Davey, but the football gods are smiling on Luca, and I'm here for it because I think he's been quite good this season. And I think, in a season where you're now outside chances of making the finals, I think maximising his ability to get some play time is great. So, yeah, good to see him in the team list this week.
Yeah, Clint, what's your take on having Jermaine Hopgood out on the edge?
I mean, it was a bit of a surprise initially, but when you sort of consider the makeup of the team and who it is we're playing, look, Maddo started on the edge against the Dragons, and there's obviously some thought in behind maybe how he contributed to some of the defensive pressures that the Dragons were able to execute against the Eels in that game. Certainly with Ravalawa crossing the line 4 times, was it? And at least 2 of those times in the opening 20 when Maddo was there on the left edge. So there might have been. I take it that this decision's made with defence front of mind, and Brad probably looking back and thinking on that South game and the good 40 minutes that Jermaine spent on that edge defending. It's likely because of that. I don't know if it's the decision that I would have made, but I can understand the rationale behind why it was made. So, look, they're 2 pretty decent forward packs that are running out there. It's kind of weird that it's 10th v 11th at this time of year, because you go to the beginning of this year, I don't think anyone would have thought that that's what would be taking place in this fixture, and it should still be a highly competitive game, is what I'm trying to say, despite some of the outs for both teams. But it's at the same time, I find myself challenged to get excited because of a lot of the points that we touched on before. And yeah, I mentioned even earlier, there's not a Parramatta supporter listening to this who's going to the game on Friday who won't be hoping in their heart of hearts for a victory, as we do every week. But at the same time, there's definitely a touch of apathy slipping in with a look to the future, and that's I share 40 sentiments, and hoping to see a guy like Luca Moretti get a few more minutes, and if this game gets out of hand and it officially closes our season out, I'd look to get some minutes into some guys that need it going forward.
Yeah, I'm not going to preface my preview comments right now. I'll stick to my thoughts on Jermaine Hopgood, because I think it's going to be interesting that he'll be playing 80 minutes. I think he has more mobility on the edge, and that could work in both attack and defence. I think when Andy Davies been there on that edge, I think he's been caught out a little bit. I think he was only on there for a short time last week, but he missed a lot of tackles in a short period of time. The pace of the Broncos was catching him out, and it may be, look, this might even be a little bit of a nod to the future, because I think there's a world in which, because the Eels have dabbled with this in the past, that Sean Lane is a middle. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen next year, but I'm not entirely ruling it out. So, and what we saw, like, Laney's had a bad year all round, like with injury, but where we were seeing him in the first grade team, and on the field, it wasn't his best football this year, was it? Like, he was quite ineffective on the edge, and I think that probably had a lot to do with the fact that he missed.
Oh yeah, he's
the early part of the season.
He's a guy that gets into rhythm. We've seen it in other seasons where if he gets disrupted by injury, he can really struggle to get back to his best. But in 2019 and 2022, where he had those long runs, in first grade without being impeded, he is absolutely world class might be too strong, but he's certainly not far off it. Back row, he's right up there in Dally M contention for the position. And yeah, unfortunately this year, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a player of worse luck than him between a broken jaw, dislocated elbow, and a big hamstring tear. So yeah, that's been a big loss for the Eels. I'll be interested to see what they do with him next year. I just want to gauge your thoughts on this, boys, because I don't know if I was a bit too harsh on the team and Team was Tuesday. I wrote that I think one way or the other, and I don't put all my stock into it, but I feel like one way or the other, we're going to learn some truths about this team this week. No Mitchell Moses. You got some big guys back though on Campbell, Gillard, and Sevo. You're struggling on confidence. You're taking on a team that they're also way down on where they should be, but they've won the last couple of games. You're both technically alive for the playoffs. You got that in your mind as far as securing a good result. I said that a loss potentially opens up a larger conversation in the near future, whereas a win sort of changes the tone of that conversation, where one is, are we talking a full rebuild or are we talking a retool? And while they both share the same couple of letters at the start, they mean vastly different things when it comes to professional sports. And I don't know, is that too much to say in a game like this? Last home game of the season, still in the hunt for the finals as mathematicals, or is there an element of truth there? Because the Eels that we know over the last 4 years, they've turned up for these sort of games. They've had bad losses, like we've seen in the last couple of weeks, but even when the chips are down, they found a way to turn it around, and and invariably make it into the finals and do a good job in the week 1, 2, or right through to the grand final there. I don't know. It feels like there is a bit more on the line this week than maybe meets the eye at first.
I think a measure of the relevance of that question is that I'm afraid to answer it.
I'm feeling a little bit more game answer your question, John. So I might step in. Yeah, we've had some, very much, one player in, one player out. It seems to feel like this year. But I don't think it could be underestimated the inclusion of Regan Campbell-Gillard when we're, talking about the proposition that you've just posed to us, because we've never had more than 38 points conceded in all of Reg's tenure at the Eels when he's been on the field, in a game in which he's played, I should say. I think the biggest loss we had that he's participated in was the 38-0 drubbing we had suffered at the hands of South Sydney a few years ago at CommBank. So his inclusion is big, and in terms of the question that you just posed to us, he represents the forward fight and the forward competitiveness, as does Jermaine Hopgood, I believe, as well. And then likewise, you've got Gutherson there at the back, flying the flag for the backs. So yeah, look, I don't think for either side. Look, and then the fact of the matter is, the NRL is the most competitive professional sporting competition in the world. There's some differences between the premiers, who's ultimately premiers each year, and everybody else. But likewise, there isn't much of a difference between teams, probably like 3 and 4 through to almost 10, 11, and 12. The variables each year is generally, and we've suffered a big time this year. Draw, injuries, suspensions, and luck. And it kind of feels like we've been hit in all the things we can't control. We've been hit very hard, and we haven't done ourselves any favors in the things that we can control. And it's only compounded the things that we can't control. So, look, if it was a heavy loss this week, and that record I alluded to with Reg was broken, I think then it becomes a little bit more of a serious conversation, because there's a vibe, and there's a little bit of emotional unrest that's crept into Eels fans the last few weeks, and it's certainly starting to manifest across online platforms. You can see it in all the different all the different responses that Sixties had to his posts, and likewise across social media and the like. But it's the fact of the matter is, in spite of some of the things that we've said in this recording already, there's some small adjustments that need to be made. They're tweaks that will have a massive swing effect on our fortunes if we can manifest them. But we're not talking about sacking half the squad, and nor should you, because that's that's not productive conversation, because it's not going to happen. Even if you did feel that's what needed to be done, which it doesn't. So look, I think whatever the result is this Friday night, and going into the end of the season, we'll absolutely, to your original question, really have an idea of the identity of the team moving forward, and likewise, it'll probably set the energy inverted commas, of next steps.
Yeah. Well, look, let's examine the team that's running out there this week, and how different that would be to any team that takes part in the NRL next year for us, as things stand. So as things stand, it would differ from our best lineup, inverted commas, best lineup next year by Mitch Moses would be in that best lineup, and Sean Lane, and that would probably be the major points of difference, would it not?
Yep.
From
at this point, yep.
Okay, so if we then were to use that as a guide, then, and I mean, it's a very rough guide, because that's certainly Mitch Moses, excuse me, is a massive factor in the Eels lineup, but he's one player. And I don't think in the context of the players that the Eels will be running out in the forwards that I'm not sure how much I could gauge the loss of Sean Lane as far as next year is concerned. Like if he's in next year, how much of a difference he brings to the team lineup that will be going out this Friday night. But so I look at the team and I think if this team gets hammered, like absolutely hammered, and it's going to be a very similar lineup that runs out there next year, I'm not going to feel too good about this. I mean, I'm very apprehensive. I think next year, if we were to not have any change to our lineup, it's the sort of squad that it would be constantly walking on thin ice, where if you had an injury, it could have a big effect on the team. That's especially in the backs or in the spine, and that's a natural consequence of the aggressive physical contact involved in rugby league. So, John, to that end, if an Eels team without one key player was to really get comprehensively beaten, I'm not sure that it says a whole lot of good things about what's going to happen next year. So, but is that what I'm expecting to happen this week? You'll have to wait till preview time for me to give you my takes on what will happen this week.
Got him off the hook there, mate.
So, fellas, we now move on to the NRL, and I want to start off with you, Clint, because you would be the best person in our news podcast to be able to comment on Daniel Anderson, because this week in the NRL, so we're into our NRL news. This week in the NRL is a Daniel Anderson round. It's fundraising across all clubs this weekend. There's all sorts of auctions that are going on. Captain's jerseys are involved in those auctions. Different clubs have got different match day experiences with premium experiences that supporters can buy at games. And all these funds are going towards helping Daniel Anderson in his recovery and his life adjustments from the surfing accident that he had earlier, or in the latter part of this last year, wasn't it? Was it Boxing Day? I'm trying to think now. But anyway, mate, talk to us about Daniel Anderson, because you, out of the three of us, you would know him best.
Yeah, look, Daniel's a former colleague of mine for a few years with my time at the club, and an absolute gentleman. Affectionately known as Big Red to many people, and there's certainly a contingent of players that he coached at the club who were involved with the club at the time that I worked there, who referred to him as such. And he's always been a very, very cheeky guy. And I think some of the footage that's been shared over the course of this year has given the wider rugby league public an insight into sort of his sense of humor, and he's always got that grin on his face. He's a very lovely man, and despite having spent time at a number of rugby league clubs, obviously as head coach at the Warriors, as head coach at the Eels in our run to the 2009 grand final. Likewise, he spent plenty of time in our junior systems under Brian Smith, and now currently involved with the Roosters. You won't meet many more rugby league people than Daniel Anderson, but the thing that he probably doesn't get enough credit for is that he's actually a very intelligent and articulate man. And I have a lot of time for Daniel. And I was always very thankful for my time working with him, because he was a guy that had a lot of time for me. I spent most of my career in sport management and with the Eels, working across the administration of the football, the NRL football team, and I spent a bit of time doing some stuff at the football department. And Daniel was always very keen to get me involved and open up opportunities for me. And we used to have really, really great rugby league discussions, over the lunch table and in the office, and just unpacking the game from different perspectives, and a really, really intelligent rugby league mind. And obviously, it's there's no way to sugarcoat it. It's pretty damn tragic, the circumstances that have led to led to his current condition. But at the same time, I don't think anybody could not be blown away by the level of humility and grace he has in tackling those challenges. It takes incredible bravery, and I think not just in the rugby league community, but also in the Australian community, we have an unspoken respect for people who tackle challenges like that, and we all rally around them. And that's why we're seeing the level of support that's going out to Daniel at the moment, and rightly so, with this level of fundraising and the awareness. And I couldn't think of a more deserving person, because I could go on for quite some time with some of the superlatives I have for Daniel, because of that level of respect that I have for him. And I'm really glad to see that the wider rugby league community and fraternity has rallied around him and continues to offer this support. And hopefully this plays some role towards better days and continuing to tackle the challenges that will lie ahead of him.
Well, mate, very well said. And I think any supporter out there listening, if you haven't already made a donation to help Daniel Anderson out, you might get involved in auctions, you might get involved in a donation this weekend. So, it's a great initiative of the NRL this weekend, and our thanks to all the different clubs involved with that. John, Tuivaiti Pangai Jr. quitting rugby league and going to boxing. Now, there's a cynical part of me.
I was about to say, it's hard not to be a cynic.
There's no one's really touching on this, but there's a stench about this as far as I'm concerned.
We're all thinking it.
John,
everyone that's listening right now is thinking this.
It is,
John.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll get you to articulate. I'll get you to articulate on behalf of both Clint and I.
Look, how often when you're set up for how much longer was he contracted? Another year or two?
I'm not sure, but
I think it was another two.
Another two. He's
two.
on roughly $750,000 a year. How many people would you know that would walk away from that sort of money to pick up a new sport where, if you're not one of the big dogs in boxing, you make nothing? Like,
I think $15,000 was quoted.
Yeah, $10,000 to $15,000 a prize fight. If you need to be the brand. That's why Tim Tszyu is a big deal in Australian boxing, because he is the brand. And he markets himself relentlessly. It's why Paul Gowan succeeded, because Paul Gowan knew how to play the heel. And he turned himself into the villain in order to make those fights work. But look, when you have a player walking away from that kind of payday, when you have a club that has in the papers had a pretty, not transparent, but they've been struggling with their cap. They've been pretty aggressive with the spending, and they've been linked to a number of really high profile, very expensive players that they want to bring in to make their team better. It doesn't look great, does it?
And straight away the talk was into the Bulldogs would be looking at signing or trying to find a marquee halfback somehow, right? That they've got, and now the talk is they've got the cash to splash. And I'm just, we could see this coming a mile off, that somehow a highly paid player at the Bulldogs was going to willingly part ways. Now, I don't want to speculate about how a person is compensated for, as you said, like the big contract that he's on, and how these sorts of things work. But as I said, and you've articulated there, 40, there's a stench about this.
I know that NRL clubs are very quick to defend their actions, and I know that Gordy had to make a retraction on NRL 360 a week or two ago about, he made some offhand comment about how if you won a premiership in the last X amount of years, then odds are you were cheating, and he had to walk that one back. But it feels like that is the reality of the NRL. Is that if you want to be, history points towards the best teams being cap cheaters, and when the worst team is also a cap cheater, as we saw of our own club, going back to 2016 or prior to 2016, but caught up to them in 2016. It's like, well, you see this sort of stuff, and it's the same club that has quite publicly linked with offering shares in a pub to recruit a marquee target. Like, they're pretty clearly willing to bend the rules, or if not outright break the rules. So, yeah, like this one it looks bad, it smells bad. That's all we need to say, I think.
Yeah. Well, we can't really say anything more because we don't know, and these are all the hypotheticals. How is he going to be supported going forward?
Did he get in contact with one of those Saudi princes that we were talking about a few weeks ago? Is that what's going on here?
Mbappe, he's got some loose change in his pocket.
Yeah. Do you know what? We're probably envious of any club that can make things work, because, look, the Roosters seem to be able to make things work. The Storm seem to be able to make things work. It looks like the Bulldogs are heading down the path of being able to make things work, moving on players when you need to move them on, somehow being able to bring in players on even more money, but somehow it doesn't show. We know the Roosters are great at doing that. At doing that, and the thing is, when the Eels tried to do something creative, we were awful at it.
It's also I feel like it's always a time and reminder that every major salary cap scandal in the NRL era has either been a self-report to get ahead of the curve or a whistleblower that was a disgruntled ex-employee that had gone to the NRL.
Yeah.
Independently, the NRL has never found... They've found minor breaches, and they always hand out their $50,000 fines for that sort of thing. They haven't found a major cap scandal of their own volition.
Yeah. And I think what did we have? The issue with the Sharks just happened to fall on all the years.
Yeah, and then the NRL was like, they cheated before and after, but it definitely didn't impact 2016 where they won the title. So
no, because they'll
cap compliant at the end of the regular season, of the grand final, exactly.
Yep, on the day of the grand final.
Well, you put all those pieces together.
That is the dictionary definition of creative accounting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So as independent entities, you can put all those pieces together and sort of picture like how and why the salary cap works the way it does in the NRL.
Yeah, and you know what? It's when you have someone like Gordon Tallis, who has the level of experience that he has been at a big club, that is able to have
Gordy knows how the game works exactly.
Yeah. He's when he actually has the courage of his convictions to say something, but he's then forced to retract it, like forced to take a step back on what he's saying. You know what? There's times that says more than anything. When because he's only saying what a lot of people suspect, and he's saying it with more inside knowledge than any of us have. I mean, in us having a dig like we've just done and saying, look, this stinks, and and these clubs are this club and that club can be quite creative with how they do things. We don't know the ins and outs of what's going on there. Everything could be completely above board. Obviously, the Storm have some relationships with businesses that have passed muster with the NRL in terms of their TPAs. The Bulldogs wanted to get something similar, and it didn't pass muster. And I mean, they were genuinely upset because in their mind, it wasn't too different to what the Storm have in arrangements. So, it's we don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. We're pretty sure that the Eels aren't involved in any TPAs anymore. So,
and what a competitive disadvantage that is.
Yeah, and that's a whole different story. But anyway, we move on. It's they're basically, the Bulldogs look like achieving what we suspected, which was you keep going out there, you keep signing people, and then you worry about moving people on after you get people that you want. And and I suspect that they probably got someone in mind that they're going to go after quite heavily.
This doesn't happen unless there are other wheels in motion.
Yep. But of course, the other big signing, there's been a couple of other big signing news announcements that have come out. Well, Payne Haas, it's wasn't official, but it's been reported he's about to extend 3 years with the Broncos. Is that a complete surprise? I mean, you're talking about he's with there was the rumours about the Bulldogs, right? But it's been hard to prize him away from where he is at the moment, even though there's obviously been the issues in the past where he said he was going to test the market and all that. He had his own fans booing him a couple of years back when he was first suggesting he was going to do this. But he's in a very strong team. He's in a state which makes him a superstar within that state. High profile, well paid, strong team. Surely a no-brainer to be sticking around.
I still wince at the price tag a little bit, even with the cap going up. That is an expensive middle forward, but this is probably as close to a win from both parties as you can get. The duration of the contract is healthy. I think 3 years.
Yeah.
He's young.
They got that part right.
They got that right. As soon as I saw that, I was like, yep, the duration's right. Between 3 to 4, I think, is a sweet spot for these sort of deals. You can maybe stretch it to 5 with a player as young as Payne.
And what's the dollar amount again?
1.2 per.
About
I think
1.2
is the initial report. So I do wince at that. That is not just market resetting money in general, but it's literally the best player in the competition sort of money for a position that doesn't influence the game as much as those other positions. Like prop is important, but it's not halfback, fullback, dummy half.
And as we talked about last week,
you're talking
that amount is close to
Reg
both
plus
the Reg
Corey
and
Horsburgh,
Junior combined.
And it also makes me wonder, and we were talking about Brisbane earlier and how they've added Reece Walsh to the squad this year. What does someone like him in his current form command on the open market comparatively? Because you'd argue that he is the as we alluded to before, the biggest difference in Brisbane's performances this year. He's helped elevate them to that next level.
Mm-hmm.
If your prop is 1.2 million, what's Reece Walsh worth?
1.5. And I say that without hesitation.
I would
think he's a
so do I.
1.5.
So do I.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
With the cap going up, given he's only 20, 21? Like Reece Walsh is shockingly young. He's younger than Dill, and Dill is shockingly young. 1.5. I think you wince very, very slightly, like the very slightest of winces, and then you just turn around and have a big grin on your face if you can get him, because you make that work some way, somehow with the rest of your squad. I think Walsh is...
Now, well, let me ask the two of you this. Given his age, before the end of his career, will there come a time where he's on $2 million a year?
If the cap trends the way it is, then I think we will see $2 million players before he retires. Yeah, whether it's Reece Walsh, I don't know, because by the time
agreed, 40s, and the fact of the matter is most deals have ratchet clauses, that follow the I'll call it the CPI increase of the
salary cap,
of the salary cap. So
I don't know. I don't know if it'll be Reece explicitly. But I think we will see a $2 million player before Reece is done. And I mean, if he stays hot the way he has for the next 5-10 years, then he could very well much be the first $2 million player.
Well, of course, the other big contract news that's happened in the last week or so is at the Titans with Tino Fa'asuamaleaui a 10-year deal. A 10-year deal. I mean, that's always fraught with danger, isn't it? The such long-term deals, but they obviously wanted to make sure that he didn't go anywhere. He must be exceptionally comfortable living up on the Gold Coast. So anything you want to add on top of just that straight-out news that he's got that long-term deal?
Well, I feel like people aren't learning lessons. And look, Parramatta to also have their own contract to worry about in that regard with Dill, although it is structured differently with the 3+3+3 setup. And I imagine there are already clauses that have maybe been invoked after what happened earlier this year as not de-escalators, but like potential outs for the club. But it feels like no one has looked at North Queensland with Jason Taumalolo and said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't do this. Because Taumalolo was the better player, or at least offensively, was by far the better player than Tino. Like, Tino was a very good attacking player as a middle forward, but Taumalolo was literally a generational middle in terms of what he could do in his offensive production. And, he's halfway through that contract and he's already a shadow of himself. Like, he's been impacted by injury this year, and that slowed him down a bit, which is something you consider. But even before the injuries, he was slowing down. Like, his production was being restricted. And this was in a red-hot Cowboys team. So, Tino, outstanding player. I think a little bit overrated, even before the contract came out. I think he's been a little bit overrated, which, again, is not to say he's not an outstanding player, but I just think he is a smidge overrated. The Titans obviously have their guy for the next 10 years, but I don't think it's good practice.
Okay, now the other thing too that's come out in the latter part of last week was that Manly, South Roosters and Brisbane have been confirmed for round 0 in Las Vegas.
That sounds so ominous. It's like, okay, round 0.
Yeah, there's a missing G.
Yeah.
Is there a missing G? We're obviously talking about clubs that have celebrity connections in the United States to help with promotion. You've got a Brisbane team that's named the Broncos, so you've got that there. The Roosters obviously going to be promoted as the Sydney Roosters, so it's Americans will identify with the city of Sydney. So I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of that decision. Not every club, of course, nominated to go there for this first year.
From an American sense, I have to say, marking the Roosters the Sydney Roosters is an awful idea, even though that is their identity. In America, you very rarely have more than one team to a city. Like, they take on the identity of that singular team. There are exceptions. The big cities like LA, New York, and a couple others will have multiple teams in a given code, but they're going to go there and say, okay, these are the Sydney Roosters. Where's Manly? Which state capital is Manly? So
yeah. No, I do see that point, but you know what? They're probably going to have that issue in. If it wasn't the first year, they were going to have it in the second year or the third year, unless you really spread out the and made sure that there was a really large geographical spread with every group that went there. But I totally see your point there, John. It's from that perspective. It'd be interesting. What did they say? Did they say there were 10 clubs that nominated to go for the first year?
It was around 10, I believe. Yeah.
Well, Parramatta wasn't one of them.
No, and well done to the club for that one, for not getting that one wrong. I do got to say, if we can have a round 0 for an American junket, which I've got no issues with because it makes sense, because you got to get the teams back on a plane. Can we not have a 5-day turnaround from Darwin? And pardon my French there, but if we can do that for the other clubs, can the Eels not have a 5-day turnaround coming from Darwin?
Yeah. It's fair. It's a fair call. It's a fair call. And can we get a bye before one of the Origin games?
I'm not going too far, Sixties. I'm not going too far here. Don't get out of hand. Don't get out of pocket. I'm just saying.
Can we also not play 3 teams in consecutive weeks coming off byes? That would also be good.
Hey, you guys are getting real greedy now. I'm just saying, if we can have round 0, just no 5-day turnarounds.
Yeah. Well, okay, fellas. So now, just before we wrap up, a couple of things quickly. The Knights have got a sellout this week. Very quickly, yes or no, the Knights will make the finals.
I think it's unavoidable at this point.
Yeah, I think so too.
And
Clint?
Clint, I'll get your answer first, but I just want to expand on this.
Oh,
Yeah, Clint,
look, it's hard to see them not making it.
Yep. Okay, John.
I think the Knights are again. It's another issue that's touched Parramatta this year, and it shows you how both liquid and powerful confidence is. Because 2 months ago, the Knights were more spoon contenders than top 8 or top 4 contenders, and the Eels were tracking right for a top 4 finish. And suddenly they're the team that's breathing fire and looking unstoppable. And nothing's changed in their roster. And the Eels, on the flip side, are slumping. Same as the Roosters. Same as the Cowboys were the reverse example too. They've awful to start with, then got hot, and now they've cooled down a bit. Confidence is like the unquantifiable factor when it comes to professional sports, but especially rugby league, where momentum means so much, both in a given game and across the course of a season. And now Newcastle, look, I don't think they're title contenders, but in the context of the regular season, they look damn near unstoppable.
Yeah, they certainly disposed of the Bulldogs with ease. I think the Bulldogs have probably flown under the radar in terms of the criticism, because if the Eels or a couple of other clubs were performing like the Bulldogs, I think the media would be really putting the boot in.
Oh, it'd be a frenzy.
And big time.
Mm-hmm.
There's some high-profile players out there who are looking particularly ordinary. Last thing I wanted to quickly touch on was there was a bit of a story floating around this week that Josh Schuster was going to be shifted away from the 5/8 role for the Seagulls game this weekend into the forward. So he was going to make that transition that they were talking about, and the Jake Arthur would be playing in the halves this week in his place. Now, it's not how the Seagulls have named it, but are you expecting that you might see Schuster in the forwards and Jake Arthur at 5/8 as a last-minute change?
Well, he isn't a 5/8 rear end, isn't he? I think Josh needs to bite the bullet, just like Manly need to, and make that transition sooner rather than later. And he knows that in 2024 he's not playing 5/8. They've got Luke Brooks coming in, and there is no doubt he takes over at 5/8. So, I watched a lot of Josh coming through the junior reps, given that Manly and Parramatta always had big fiery clashes, and he always screamed to me as if he was going to realise his full potential, he needed to be in the back row, and also all the sort of mouthful of cement that comes with that sort of thing, and toughening up and playing less flashy football, but maximising your physical traits on the back of it. And everything we've seen so far sort of points to the contrary. He had prolonged bitter contract disputes with Manly, which quickly turned when Manly sort of caught his bluff after signing Luke Brooks, and he still got $800,000 out of him though per year, so he's not exactly crying in that regard. But yeah, this is a move that I think makes sense, and Manly should be making it this week. I think Jake should be, Jake obviously isn't going to be their frontline half next year, but developing Jake to be a better backup half for Manly makes sense. Developing Josh Schuster to be a competent starting edge back rower makes sense. So logically, these two moves synergize. You should be doing it this week.
Yeah, and I even wondered too, going into next year, that Jake himself might end up in a lock position rather than a halves position, but that'll be another story for them to.
Yeah, exactly. And Jake could quite easily, if he goes that path, could still occupy a utility forward role on the bench where he is your backup halfback within the squad still. So getting playmaking reps into his game is still more valuable than getting him into Josh Schuster's game.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, fellas, I think we've just about exhausted all the Eels news, all the NRL news. So once more, a big thanks to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf at Northmead and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Again, a reminder that the home of the Eels, Parramatta Leagues Club, is where you will find us about half an hour after full time on Friday night as we dissect what will be, I'm going to take the confident stance here, fellas, what will be the Eels' victory over the Roosters, a victory that will propel the Eels back into strong contention for a finals place. So come and join us and have a drink, grab a pizza or some of the other fine food options that are available in Jack's Bar and Grill. Have a listen to us talk about the game and enjoy being in the home of the Eels. John, Clint, thank you again for another fine episode. To our listeners, thank you for being part of this. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe and give us a like. That all helps with the metrics on that particular platform. And apart from all of that, go you mighty Eels.